This video is sponsored by Saley. Welcome to England, 1786. Prisons were overflowing. For years, Britain sent criminals to America. Then America gained independence, closing that door. So in 1787, 11 ships sailed, carrying 775 convicts. Their destination? The other side of the world. 8 months, 15,000 miles. Sadly, 48 didn't make it. Upon arrival, there were no familiar roads, no European buildings, no recognizable towns, just the Eora people and an untouched harbor. What they built here we recreated using AI, from historical maps, paintings, and records. This is Sydney. Unlike those 775 convicts, no one's forcing you onto a ship. But when you do travel, Saley keeps you connected and on track. Find the nearest shrimp on the Barbie. Saley's an eSIM app. Get local data plans for over 150 countries, right from your phone. Do it before you even land. No physical SIM cards needed. No searching for stores upon arrival. No expensive home carrier roaming fees. Turns out getting to Australia doesn't have to be a punishment anymore. Download the app, choose your country, and you're connected the moment you land. It's clean, simple, and truly affordable. Visit saley.com/SaveMat or use code SaveMat for 15% off the 5 GB plan. Link in description. Now back to Sydney. January 26, 1788. The ships just docked in Port Jackson. Nobody aboard had ever seen this place. The harbor was vast, deep, surrounded by woods, eerily silent, save for the sound of their own ships. Their commander, Arthur Phillip, called it the world's finest natural harbor. And looking at it now, it's hard to disagree. 3 months after landing, convict Francis Fawkes drew the very first map of Sydney Cove. He was sentenced to 7 years for stealing a coat and boots. His map shows the 11 ships, basic paths, tents for men and women, saw pits, storehouses, a blacksmith shop. While George Washington was sworn in as America's first president, and Paris was on the brink of the Bastille storming, this was Sydney. That was the entire city. Six years later, Thomas Waddling, another convict who forged banknotes in Scotland, painted this view of Sydney Cove directly from life. Tents were gone. Brick buildings lined the waterfront. Ships filled the harbor. Town was emerging. Waddling himself wasn't impressed, complaining the colony was tiny compared to his hometown. He wasn't wrong, but it was growing. This was the seat of government, the first government house. Brick walls, a timber fence, 2 small guard boxes at the gate. From here, Arthur Phillip governed over 1,000 people. Mostly convicts. Men and women who'd stolen clothes, bread. Guarded by about 200 soldiers, not much better off. Not your typical government house, but it held everything together. By 1797, the colony faced a problem. They grew grain but lacked efficient milling. So they built this, Sydney's first windmill on the highest hill. They simply called it Windmill Hill. Windmill Hill. Governor Hunter had the parts shipped from England. Convict John Davis built it. Could grind a bushel of wheat in 10 minutes. Down below, the rocks was the convict quarter. They lived in their own small stone and timber homes, raised chickens and pigs, grew vegetables in fenced gardens. After their government work, they were mostly free, running businesses from home. Baking, blacksmithing, opening pubs. Less a prison, more a rugged village on the sandstone. The windmill lasted 3 years before it fell apart. But the hill kept its name, now home to the Sydney Observatory. By the late 1790s, Sydney was more than just a cove. Ex-convicts got small land grants to farm inland near Parramatta. Roads were carved through the bush. The Hawkesbury River was farmed before its road was done. Sydney Cove remained the port for ships, goods, and news, but the colony's heart was shifting west. 11 years after the first fleet arrived with no plan or food, there were farms, roads, a second town, and nearly 5,000 people. It wasn't England, but it was becoming permanent. 15 years after the first fleet, this is what they'd built. Sandstone houses, fenced gardens, a working wharf. Ships from 3 continents docked where there was once only wilderness. The population neared 7,000. Trading ships arrived often. The colony no longer just waited for supplies to survive. It was starting to trade on its own terms. Convicts still arrived. But so did free settlers, merchants, and sailors who stayed. Sydney became a place people chose, not just a place they were sent. They were sent here as punishment. Now some owned the place. We saw this building before. A modest brick structure, timber fence, 2 guard boxes. That was in 1791. It grew by 1807. A long drawing room was added. A veranda stretched across the whole front. Still not fancy by European standards. Every governor here grumbled it was damp, too small, and falling apart. But it held the colony together for 56 years. Australia's first newspaper was printed here. The first laws came from here. 9 governors lived and ruled from this address. The painter, John Eyre, arrived in Sydney as a convict for breaking into houses. By 1807, he had his pardon and was painting the building that once held his fate. A year after this painting, soldiers would march through that gate, go upstairs, and arrest the governor in his bedroom. All because of rum. January 26, 1808. Exactly 20 years after the first fleet anchored here. You are arrested, Governor. 400 soldiers marched down Bridge Street. Band playing, flags flying, bayonets out. The governor's daughter tried to stop them at the gate. With her parasol, they found Governor Bligh hiding behind a bed. Australia's first and only military coup, fueled by a fight over who controlled the rum trade. History called it the Rum Rebellion. The colony was 20 years old and had already overthrown its government. The colony needed, the British government refused to pay, so Governor Macquarie made a deal. 3 merchants would build it for a monopoly on importing 45,000 gallons of rum into the colony. No cash changed hands. The hospital was paid for entirely with alcohol. That's why it's called the Rum Hospital. Construction started in 1811. It took 5 years, mostly because the builders cut so many, collapsed before it opened. One of the 3 merchants was also the colony's chief surgeon. The man treating the sick profited from the rum trade. The North Wing is now New South Wales Parliament House. These cannons came from the Sirius, one of the first fleet's 11 ships, wrecked off Norfolk Island in 1790. Hauled back to Sydney, they were mounted here, at Dawes Point to defend the harbour. Below them, the government dockyard. Behind that, a town climbing the sandstone hills. 30 years of building, all visible from this one spot. The 2 well-dressed figures on the right aren't convicts. They're colonists, people who chose to be here, or were born here, a new kind of Sydney resident. This exact spot where cannons once stood is now a pylon of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. While Bolivar liberated South America and Napoleon rotted on an island, this was Sydney, a working harbour, a few hundred buildings, Aboriginal. Australians watching a town replace their world in 30 years. Empires were falling. Sydney still waited for its first proper church. Here it is, Sydney's proper church. The first was mud and sticks, built in 1793 by convicts. The convicts burned it down 5 years later. This replacement was stone with a 150-foot round tower attached. It looked wrong. Everyone agreed. They called it the ugliest church in Christendom. Never built a church before, and it showed. From this hill you see the whole colony. Where the streets stop, the bush begins. No gradual change, just an edge. On one side, a British town. The only major European settlement on a continent Europe-sized. On the other side, everything else. Land home to Aboriginal Australians for 50,000 years, and still was. By 1819, the Eora people moved between worlds, fishing, trading at town edges, some living just beyond that line. But their numbers were already halved. By smallpox in the colony's first year. They were still here, just far fewer. Every building in this video was built by these men. By 1821, convicts and ex-convicts were about 2/3 of the colony. They quarried stone, laid roads, built churches, barracks, the hospital.
Dawn till dusk, watched by armed gorge.
Flogging was the standard punishment for going too slow. But it wasn't a simple story. Some were assigned to private settlers. Conditions varied wildly depending on your owner. A lucky few, like Francis Greenway, used their skills to build real lives. Most didn't. The men in this painting are breaking stone. Some got 7 years for stealing bread. Some will never go home. This is where they slept. Before this building opened in 1819, renting rooms, sleeping rough, vanishing into town at night. The government had no idea where half of them were. Macquarie's fix. Put them all in one place. 600 men in hammocks stacked 3 high, locked in at night, marched out to work. Francis Greenway designed it. A convict building. A prison for convicts. He did so well, Macquarie gave him his freedom. The building still stands today. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Remember the ugliest church in Christendom? This is what Sydney looked like when it actually tried. St. James, finished 1824. Sandstone, Georgian, elegant. The kind of building that said colony was no longer embarrassed. Hyde Park in front, gas lamps coming in, proper streets, carriages. Sydney stopped looking like a camp and started looking like a city. St. James still stands. Sydney's oldest church, still holding services every Sunday. This view signaled Sydney was entering a new phase. Government. House on the left, Fort Macquarie on the point. Ships from 4 continents in the harbor. Well-dressed people strolling. 5 years earlier, transportation had ended. Dressed-up writers on a midday walk. 5 years before, travel stopped. No more prisoner ships. Sydney was now a city with 35,000 people. Convicts already here were still serving time. The last would be free in the 1850s. But no new ones were coming. The people in this picture chose to be here or were born here. The convict colony was over. This is what replaced it. 2 forts, 1 entrance, Dawes Battery to the left, where it all began. Cannons from the First Fleet, now a real fort. Fort Macquarie on the right, built on Bennelong Point in 1817. For 60 years, the harbor was defended with whatever they had. By 1840, it looked serious. Fort Macquarie's spot would be demolished in 1901. Something else would be built there later. Something you might know. Everyone in this story arrived by sea. All communication from London traveled this way. A ship is arriving now. Government House on the hill, flying the Union Jack. To new arrivals, this building had one clear message. You're still in the British Empire, just really far away. The old, damp Government House, complained about by 9 governors. For 50 years, was torn down in 1846. This is the replacement. Gothic style, battlements, towers, like a mini English castle. In Australia, it looked like England. That was the whole point. Colonies worldwide were gaining freedom. Latin America had revolted. Europe was in turmoil. The US was 60 years independent. Sydney flew the Union Jack and seemed fine with it. A colony built on punishment finally had a proper court. The Supreme Court opened in 1827. Next to St. James's Church, on a square planned as the city's center. The courthouse was originally meant to. Someone in London chose a court instead. In front of it, Hyde Park, set aside as public land in 1810. Australia's oldest public park. Convicts used to race horses here. 30 years prior, justice meant an officer and a whipping post. Now it had columns and a chief justice. Both buildings are still here. This is George Street, Sydney's main road since 1788. The same road that started as a dirt path. Between the first tents. By 1842 it had proper sewers or streetlights outside the center. A city in name still growing. On Flagstaff Hill you could see everything. The working waterfront below, the harbor beyond. The Blue Mountains on the horizon, 60 kilometers away. Miller's Point was Sydney's rough area. Docks, warehouses, sailors, workers. The harbor that sustained the colony for 50 years was still its lifeblood. Wool exported, immigrants arriving, ships from everywhere. The windmill still turned, goats still grazed. Despite the grand buildings, this is what really ran Sydney. A working harbor town that had learned to be a city. Same area, street level now. The Whalers Arms. The hero of Waterloo. 2 pubs in view. This was Miller's Point, where ships docked and sailors spent money. The hero of Waterloo is still there, one of Australia's oldest pubs. From convict stone in 1843. Rumor has it, a trapdoor behind the bar sent overboard onto ships bound for China. Sydney had its grand buildings. And it had this. This is the tank stream, Sydney's origin. Arthur Phillip chose this spot in 1788 for this freshwater creek. The tide is turning, Mary. It supplied the colony for decades. By 1852 it was a polluted drain choked with waste. The city had found other water sources and forgotten. The women washing clothes on its banks likely didn't know. They were standing on the city's founding reason. This is the road west. Sydney to Parramatta, the colony's second town, 25 kilometers inland. The toll gate showed the colony had grown. Roads needed funding. You paid to use them. The round booth housed the toll keeper. Someone sat there, all day collecting coins from carts. In 1788, only bush lay beyond. By the 1850s, a road with a gate and a collector. That's progress. 4 years after gold was found, this is what happened to Sydney. The population doubled. Ships arrived daily. People flocked from everywhere. George Street went from a colonial center to a boomtown Main Street almost. Overnight. The tents of 1788, the dirt track, the 1840, and now this. Only 67 years. The gold rush was just 100 years after the first fleet. This is what a tent camp became. For 100,000 people. Ships packed the harbor. Factories, railways, cathedrals. A city that stretched as far as the eye could see. The town hall clock tower in the center. St. Mary's Cathedral rising on the right. Still being built. Never quite finished. Sydney was always under construction. St. Mary's Cathedral to the right. Still being built. Never quite done. Sydney, always under construction. 30 years prior, this was a colony. Gold changed it all. Wealth, people, dreams. And it never slowed down. A century of this pace. From 11 ships and hope to this. Sydney wanted to impress. So it built this. The Garden Palace. Inspired by London. Built in 8 months. A huge dome. 14,000 items from 34 nations. Over 1 million guests in 7 months. In a colony of 700K. Then, 5:40 a.m. September 22nd, 1882. Fire. The building vanished in 40 minutes. Government records, museum items, census data all burned. Witnesses saw Queen Victoria's statue. Stand defiant, engulfed by flames. Then it too fell. The cause remains unknown. January 1st, 1901. Sydney lit up for a new nation. 6 colonies. United. Australia. Still a dominion, but with its own parliament, PM and flag. 113 years later, after those 11 ships, the continent became a country. No revolution, no fight for freedom. Just a vote, a celebration, and bright lights. That's how Aussies do it. Thanks for watching.